reopening the hot zones. Governor Cuomo taking the first step toward easing some of the tough COVID restrictions when schools and businesses can get back to business. But first,
was in close proximity to someone on Saturday who has just tested positive. Now, unfortunately, I have to take myself off the field.
A high-level quarantine. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy abruptly walks out of a news conference after learning that news. As we approach 4 o'clock, we are glad you're with us. I'm David Ushery.
And I'm Gilma Avalos in for Natalie Pascarella. And it was one of Governor Murphy's senior staff members who tested positive for COVID-19. So far, the governor and his wife had tested negative.
But as a precaution, as you heard, he's now going to self-quarantine. News 4's New Jersey reporter Brian Thompson live at the governor's home in Middletown. Brian?
Yeah, Dave, and there was a second test this afternoon, and it also turned out negative for the governor, so that was good news for him right now. But of course, with his incubation period, could be several days, they want to be doubly sure. In the meantime, now it's been about 3.5 hours since he broke that news to everyone, and we still haven't seen him at his home here, but we would expect that he would quarantine here at his home on the banks of the Nonessential River.
I was just informed by my colleagues that I was in close proximity to someone on Saturday who has just tested positive.
A stunning announcement from Governor Murphy in the middle of an event in South Jersey. His home in Middletown now expected to be where he'll quarantine for an unknown number of days. Murphy did say he was tested Monday and it was negative.
As you all know, just because if I was with someone Saturday night and you got tested Sunday morning, that doesn't really tell you a lot. You got to wait and see to make sure there wasn't any incubating.
That's a message the governor has driven home in his now twice-a-week COVID news conferences. But social distancing not always easy. He held this media availability yesterday in South Orange, speaking to reporters and photographers barely 6 feet away and without wearing a mask. In a statement from his office, his communications director said it was a senior staff member who tested positive and is quarantining at home. In addition, contact tracing has begun to everyone who may have come into contact with that staffer during the potential infection window. The governor ended his disclosure today this way.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Now, that staffer has been identified late this afternoon by the governor's office as Mike DeLameter. He is the deputy chief of staff for intergovernmental affairs. We don't know his condition right now, if it's just a positive test or if he has symptoms. That, of course, would be privileged information that people can withhold. As for the governor, he is canceling all in-person events now for the remainder of the week. He and the First Lady will be quarantining through the end of the weekend. They'll get a test then, and if all is clear, they feel they would have gotten through the incubation period. He'll be back at work next week by Monday or Tuesday. Live in Middletown, Brian Thompson, News 4 New York.
All right, Brian, thank you for that update. Back across the Hudson, some encouraging news today for most of New York's COVID hot zones. And less stress, most schools and businesses are getting the green light to reopen. Now, here's the breakdown. The Queens red and orange zones now move to yellow. The Brooklyn orange zone also goes to yellow, but the red zone stays red. Ozone Park added to the yellow list. Rockland and Orange counties stay the same. Confused? Yep, we get that. The red zone positivity rate in New York is more than 6.5%. The rest of the state's positivity rate stands at 1.4%. News 4's Andrew Siff's going to try to sort through all this for us. He's live in Forest Hills. Andrew?
Well, David, the important thing to remember is that most of the cluster zones in New York City now move to yellow. And what does yellow mean? It means that indoor dining can resume. And that is a huge development for small businesses like the one behind me that have been facing weeks and weeks of anxiety.
It's depressing. It's so hard to survive this thing.
Restaurant owner Carmine Polito with a business in an orange zone, forced to close his indoor dining at Portofino's the last 2 weeks. Thrilled to get his tables back tomorrow. And what was your reaction to that?
Oh, I'm going to kiss the floor. That they give you a little piece of bread.
Governor Cuomo made it official today. 2 weeks of restrictions getting relaxed for tens of thousands of people. That after the percentage of COVID positives in the central Queens clusters dropped in red zones from 4.7 to 2.5, orange from 1.9 to 1.6, and yellow up slightly from 1.9 to 2.1. Now Queens clusters all go to yellow.
Trace it back to where it starts find a small outbreak, a small cluster, and jump on it.
But in Brooklyn, the red zones stay red. Positivity dropped, but only from 7.4 to 5.5. Orange went from 2.6 to 2.7, and yellow from 1.5 to 1.7.
Now I'm just so used to it, like fluctuating, that, you know, it's great, but it could be back up again 2 weeks from now.
While businesses closed by the cluster rules can reopen tomorrow, schools will have to wait until Monday. How confident are you that in-person school will be able to continue going forward?
Andrew, I will never pretend to know what the future brings, but I will tell you that based on the experience we've had so far, I'm very confident.
But the governor said despite the reduction in cases in the most problematic neighborhoods, he's worried about the fall.
I think you're going to see more microclusters in New York. You're going to see a higher rate in New York. You're going to see a higher rate nationwide, and you're going to see a higher rate globally.
The governor basing that less than optimistic forecast on the realities of the fall, with more people heading indoors. As for schools, the reason why they're not opening until Monday, the Department of Education said they needed time to notify the principals and the teachers that classes will resume next week. Live in Forest Hills, Andrew Siff, News 4 New York.
Andrew, thank you. Governor Cuomo does not want to add New Jersey and Connecticut to the tri-state quarantine list, even though both states are seeing spikes and technically meet the criteria. Today, the governor said New York is not set up to do border control and that quarantine rules would be impossible to enforce. He called the situation with New Jersey and Connecticut, quote, unique and absurd, but warned shutting them out will be disruptive to the economy. In New Jersey, today is the fourth day in a row of more than 1,000 positive COVID-19 cases. The state reported 1,062 new cases today, and that pushes the statewide total to more than 223,000. 18 new deaths were also reported today. The teachers union in Woodbridge, New Jersey is pressing for in-person classes to be suspended after 15 people tested positive at the school. For now, the school superintendent says in-person classes will continue, adding that he's been consulting with local health and elected officials and would not rule out going back to remote only if a certain threshold was reached.